Fantastic. Yes, I think you can all hear me. Okay, so we're going to proceed to the final event of the conference, discussion panel, YIVO's purpose today. It's been a long day. It's been a wonderful day. I have a few comments before we even start talking about the topic. As some of you know, I've been working on a book about the history of YIVO in America, and I've learned so much in the last day or so, things that I thought about in new ways, new insights, connections I didn't see before, because so little is done. So this has, for me, been tremendously inspiring. And I hope those of you, particularly those of you who are young, that is, younger than I am, are equally inspired to realize the treasures and opportunities there are to work with YIVO materials, that this is so much uncharted territory, and that the history of YIVO is in so many ways the history of American Jewry in the 20th century. And this all needs to be explored. There's so much work that remains to be done. So I wanted to start off by saying that. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about how YIVO conferences worked many, many years ago. YIVO conferences every year had a report. This was an annual event, and the different departments of YIVO would tell you what they'd done. They also talk about the budget. Was actually published in YIDIAS every year. They stopped doing that in the 1960s, I think. They would tell you what they were doing, what future plans were, what needs to be done. There are so many questions that have arisen today, but many of them are in some ways the same questions that we began with in 1940. YIVO was an organization that had three pillars. It was devoted to collecting, it was devoted to research and analysis, publication, and also devoted to teaching. One of the questions today, what we're going to talk about, is how is YIVO done on all of those fronts, but I'm going to just remind you of that first. But the first question I think I want to throw out there is the question of, to whom does YIVO serve? YIVO is a folks institute that has sought throughout its history the question of who is this folk that it serves? Who is YIVO's audience? It's changed, obviously, greatly since 1940. So I thought by starting off by asking all of our esteemed panelists who they thought YIVO's audience was, and what YIVO's mission is to serve this audience.
Are you looking at me?
Certainly.
Well, I would guess that YIVO's audience, if I had to, this is not something I really ever considered, but YIVO audience, I guess, is someone like me, who is interested in Yiddish language and culture and Jewish history, and wants to explore further. That could be something very broad. It could be something, more focused, and it really could be anybody. It doesn't have to be a scholar. It could be someone who wants to be inspired by historical objects, artifacts, and documents. That's more or less a vague sense of, what I mean.
I would just add, YIVO has many audiences, and that's part of what makes it a vibrant institution. So we have our scholarly audience that's coming to do research with our materials, that's producing the kind of scholarship that you alluded to, and we're sharing their work in our public programs, some of which are meant for, really to share that scholarship with other scholars. But at the same time, we have adult education. Some of our programs are really meant to bring the discoveries that scholars make in the archives to as vast of a public as possible. So that includes both people that already really are interested in this kind of stuff, like Eddy alluded to, but also I think we're aiming to bring it to people that don't yet know that they're really, that this can be really meaningful history and culture for them to engage with, and to deepen their own sense of who they are and the past of their family, or the past of a really interesting, even if they're not Jewish, the Jewish past, which can offer wonderful, rich things for many people. And I think we're doing all sorts of projects to bring that to people who don't already know that they love it.
I think everyone's definitely like Eddy, first and foremost. But I would also agree with that.
That would be terrible.
I would just add that, our audience is very intergenerational. So just speaking about the students we have this summer, many of whom are in the space here and online as well. Oldest student is in their 70s or 80s. The youngest student is in their teens. It's a very international audience. We have students from 11 countries, all across Europe, in Asia, Australia, and as Alex and Eddy were saying, folks who are interested in this history and culture, who care about it, who are curious to learn more, and want to engage with it and find something meaningful in it. So it could be that they're Jewish. We have many members of our audience who are Jewish, but also many members of our audience who are not Jewish and who are just very interested in this story.
I see you both want to say something, so.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I would just like to add a couple things. One is that YIVO has reclaimed its place as a truly global institution over these last 10 years. We have, for our educational programs, people tuning in from Lithuania and from Israel and from Poland and elsewhere. We have almost 80,000 subscribers to our YouTube channel, and we don't know who these people are. We have some almost 40,000 followers on Facebook. We don't know who they are. So we don't know who our folk is, actually, but I would say, as the executive director of YIVO, that, in fact, Eddy isn't the person. Eddy already knows. But I'd like to just tell a little story. I won't take a long time, but at the end of his life, Philip Roth gave a reading here of his last novel, Nemesis. And to thank him, I sent him the 2-volume encyclopedia. 2 weeks go by, I don't hear anything, so I call him up. I say, Philip, did you get the books? Oh, he said, yes, I did get the books. I have it open in front of me right now, and I'm reading it. I said, Philip, I didn't send it to you to read. I sent it to you to thank you. I didn't think you'd be interested, actually. Oh, no, he said. I used to think I was born in Newark, and now I realize it's a much bigger story. In other words, here is somebody who, at one point in his life, came to a YIVO event and said, I have nothing in common with you people. And now he understands that, in fact, he wasn't born in Newark. He was born somewhere else.
He was born in Weehawken, to be precise, I think.
And we have to make it possible for people to rediscover their interest. Let me tell you another story. We had a delegation of young Soviet Jews come. And we had a very beautiful display of materials from the Soviet Union and from Russia, some having to do with the Holocaust, and any number of those young people were appreciative and so forth. And at the end of it, this young man came up to me and he said, Mr. Brent, I want to thank you for all of this, but what has this to do with me? And it's precisely that person who is, I feel, our audience. I want somehow to get to that person who says to himself, what has this, or herself, what has this to do with me? And at the end, I want to be able to show why it has something to do with that person. And to me, that's the aim of the organization, because without that, we can't grow.
So as you see, the ideal YIVO candidate is the wicked son from the Haggadah.
Well,
Absolutely.
So what I was going to say actually is I think that our audience also is becoming, or needs to become even more, those who don't even know how to ask the question, and we're doing that in ways that we're trying to attract the very young, right? The middle school, the high school students who don't know that YIVO exists, who don't know that this culture exists, who for whom, you know, an institution like YIVO or an archive or a library is a scary place. There's a lot of people in the audience who don't need to be told that YIVO in previous decades was not always the most welcoming place to outsiders, right, or to individuals who maybe did not have the knowledge base that those at YIVO felt necessary, you know, for them to have to access those materials. And so I think that if we want to continue having a base of support, we need to do what we're trying to do with these new initiatives for the very young.
So this is super interesting. You know, first of all, you know, going back to Max Weinreich, who thought that public education was the least of YIVO's priorities. Right? Research was the priority and training. And we want to come back to that. But this is an emphasis on public education and youth, which was, by the way, you know, YIVO prior to World War II had a lot of deep attention on youth. They were deeply involved in the Yiddish schools in Eastern Europe. There was, you know, their spelling system was developed in conjunction with the Yiddish secular schools in Poland. YIVO in America had a lot less contact with young children. They did try to support Yiddish clubs in high schools, but Max Weinreich himself said, we don't do anything for little children. We don't do anything for elementary school children, you know, but he thought that the future of Yiddish was really in universities and of Jewish studies and Eastern European Jewish studies. But here you are, you showed me this educational initiative that you're working on upstairs, well, this new one. What is that, and what else are you doing?
Well, I'll say a bit about that in a second, but I just want to respond first to this question of Max Weinreich, because, you know, as you're saying that, I thought to the talk that Weinreich gave at the conference in, I think it was 1945, that was published as a pamphlet later, YIVO und die Probleme von unserer Zeit. And in that talk, it's like a wonderful, fascinating talk, and it's 1945, so it's, you know, it's such a crucial point in this history and in YIVO moving to America and in understanding the Holocaust. I mean, it's such an incredibly charged time to be speaking. And one of the things that he mentions in this talk is a student at a Yiddish school. And I don't remember the exact details, but he speaks with pride about YIVO's role in showing this student that there was actually so much more to their own culture than they knew. And this is someone who grew up speaking Yiddish, but thought, you know, there's not much to this. And then, you know, it was YIVO through the teachers, you know, I don't remember the exact details of the story, but it was through the work that YIVO did that the teachers were able to impress on the student how rich of a culture this really is. And this is something that matters, and it can be of profound importance for this young person. So I think that, you know, with that story, with Max Weinreich's interest in youth before the war, the idea that YIVO provides the kind of psychological tools for youth to understand who they are and to appreciate it and to lift themselves up. I think that there always was this idea that the work that YIVO does is going to filter out to even the youngest generation, and like this kind of self-understanding of what it means to be Jewish and of how wonderful the heritage of Yiddish-speaking Jewry is, that actually should reach even the youngest children. And to go to this project today, we're opening what we're calling the YIVO Learning and Media Center, which is a space up on the second floor here, where we've already been piloting this program and bringing class groups to visit with a focus on, you know, younger classes, high school classes, college classes, even younger if we can get them in, with the idea that we want to pique their curiosity. We want to kind of immerse them in the richness of this culture, of, you know, the wonderful posters that we have, the wonderful photographs that we have of Eastern Europe, the incredible sheet music that we have, the recordings, you know, the Ruth Rubin recordings that Itzik mentioned, you know, and on and on and on. The incredible books, the depth of knowledge that exists. We want to inspire young people to be curious about it, because the fact is the resources are there to learn these things if you want to learn. And so the next step is making people want to learn, inspiring them to want to learn.
I want to say one other thing, because Kalman, you suggested that we were turning our focus away from scholarship toward public education, but that is not true. We are adding public education to our commitment to scholarship and research. I don't think that we have limited in any way, shape, manner, or form the resources.
No, I
for
don't mean to
scholarship.
imply that, but we can return to this. Obviously, the nature of scholarship has changed over time.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But
And this public education is also renewed in ways that for a long time it wasn't there, particularly to younger people.
see, I think it's important to realize that when during Max Weinreich's lifetime, the Jewish world here was still much more intact than it is today. The survivors are almost all gone. The grandparents are almost all gone. The connection to Yiddishkeit is almost all gone for the average American Jewish person. That person grows up, or I grew up, let me put it that way, in Chicago in the 1950s and 60s in a complete wasteland. Nothing, there was nothing that, aside from going to the synagogue or joining the IDF, would reinforce my Jewish
I think I
identity.
read about you in a book by Hasia Diner.
Yeah, but YIVO provides a resource that can enable young people to realize there is something that we have materials, we have songs, we have videos, we have books, we have all kinds of things that they can avail themselves of to find out about their own heritage. And I don't know whether Max Weinreich realized what a wasteland America actually was going to become for the Jewish people.
No, he didn't expect the worst,
Yeah.
although he saw indications of certain trends.
But we see it so clearly in so many of the more recent vocal demonstrations and
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Before we move away though from the Learning and Media Center and what it's supposed to do, I want to add, because I see we are getting away from that, that I see part of our mission not just as getting young people and other individuals interested in Yiddish language and culture, but also in getting them interested in YIVO as a place. I think that we need supporters in that way who aren't necessarily going to dive deep into Jewish history and culture, but who appreciate that we are doing that, right? And I think there are two separate groups of people. And so when a group of children come in to this new Learning and Media Center, I think that we want them to feel comfortable there, right? YIVO is a place for me, even if everything they do is not for me, And so that's the way that you build another generation of supporters. I think we're getting past the point where people supported YIVO because their parents supported YIVO and because their parents supported YIVO, right? And so we have to sell YIVO, the institution, the organization, right? I love the institution, and so for me, that's kind of the first step.
Yeah, I mean, we're still very much committed to that ethos of research and training. At the same time, as everyone's been saying, the same curiosity that drew Max Weinreich and everyone else working at YIVO to the youth autobiographies, I think, is the same curiosity that drives us to want to bring classrooms, class groups into the Learning and Media Center to just engage with this history and culture, and for young people to have a voice and to feel like they have a stake in the present and the future and what this engagement with this culture can mean. And one of the things that, Jonathan, you've encouraged us always to do is to defy the stereotype, to not let the civilization be viewed in this reductive way, which is so often the case in the broader cultural landscape, that Yiddish civilization is looked at as a kind of kitschy or reductive, in some kind of reduced framework, but to open up all of these treasures to the broader public and to make them accessible. A huge part of all of our jobs is just creating that accessibility for the materials and the story that we are able to tell here. And to go back to that question of audience, today it really is anyone with an iPhone, right? Because we have our YouTube channel, and the content that we put out can be absorbed and appreciated by anyone. So we have to think, I think, in a more decentralized, global way about who could potentially be excited and energized and enriched by the materials that we have a responsibility to offer to the public.
I want to just underscore one aspect of that, which, going back to what Steph said before about this attitude of YIVO in the 80s and 90s that we've all, some of us here have experienced, but those who haven't experienced it directly have heard the stories, and Anita Norwich mentioned it earlier with the 3 Gs that prevented, but also the idea that when you walk into YIVO, I've heard this from so many people, if you walked into YIVO in the 80s or in the 90s, they would grill you and, why are you here? Do you deserve to be here? And I think that, the received attitude, as I understand it, was that you had to earn your place. And YIVO is this kind of like elite special place that, you had to get into. And I think the attitude that we're all expressing here is kind of the opposite. That YIVO, for all of us, I think we're all people up on the stage for whom we really genuinely love YIVO. It's inspired us. It has excited us. We've gotten so much from it. And the attitude is, I want to share that with people. I want to find tons of ways of sharing that. I want to do an exhibit. I want to do a class. I want to create a book where I just show people 100 cool things that are in the collections. It's not that it's under lock and key so only I can see it or only my good friends can see it. No, it's actually for everyone. So we built this Learning and Media Center where everything we're doing is a matter of trying to open the doors as wide as possible and really find all the people that might be inspired by this stuff and bring them in.
Before I get to a big question, I have a small question that can have a lot of answers. The small question is, what projects would you like the YIVO to do? The big question is a question about YIVO's mission and politics, and we'll get there in a minute. And it's all related, of course. It's hard to separate all these questions. But you've spoken about this education piece. What are the other projects that you would like to see YIVO undertake?
I mean, this is a big answer to a small question, but I think for many, many years, we have been engaged in only passive collecting. And I think that we need to re-enter a time where we have the capabilities of doing active collecting from Jewish communities around the country. And we are not at a point in time, I don't feel, where we have the infrastructure to do that. I don't know, Max Weinrich says in some talk to the folklore club at some point that YIVO was so good at collecting materials, but they weren't so good at doing anything with them, that there's so much to do with the materials, and that is still the case, but I think he was speaking about it from a research standpoint, and I am also speaking about it from the standpoint of making the materials accessible, right? We have millions of documents that are simply not as accessible as they can be. And so I think step one, and we're engaged in this, right? Processing those materials, writing finding aids for them, making them findable by scholars so that they can be used for research purposes, digitizing them, doing all of those things, clearing out this monumental backlog of work that needs to be done so that we can properly engage in active collecting of materials. It's like a 30-year project.
I would say that one of the desiderata is something along the lines of a Frankel Center or a Schusterman Center, where you bring in 10 scholars annually, biannually, to focus specifically on the archives.
Right. With a Good Friday lunch, yeah.
Of course. Obviously this is something that's contingent on funding and space and all kinds of things like that. But it's like that's something that I think about occasionally because, there are people here who are involved in such projects and they did very well. So I think that YIVO is sort of perfectly situated to have something like that.
If I could say one more thing. We were recently approached by someone who wanted to start a collection project of Hasidic Yiddish, which is a very good idea.
This brings me to a question that was going to come later, but why not ask it now? people ask me the question often about YIVO's relationship to today's Yiddish-speaking folk, who are primarily Haredi Jews, and about its relationship to Orthodox Jews historically. And if you know, you've read Cecile's book, you know that, Orthodox Jews were always welcome, but it was never their primary constituency in Europe because they were on a secular basis, and many Orthodox Jews were uncomfortable with this. What people don't know is the extent to which YIVO did reach out in the 40s and 50s, but not in the ways that were necessarily desirable to those communities. For instance, there was a Hasidic folklore project done. Abraham Heschel actually was the instigator of this. But without telling you the entire history of YIVO in America, how does YIVO understand today its relationship to Yiddish-speaking Jews and the Orthodox world more broadly?
I'll just start, I guess, by saying that our audience who comes to our public programs is diverse, and including on this metric. And in particular, we've had some programs about the history of Hasidism, which garnered a larger, Hasidic or Haredi audience. But I think that generally speaking, our approach is very similar to what you articulated in terms of the pre-war reality, which is that we are open, we would love for them to come, and the areas of our interest and that community, don't overlap so much, but where they do, our doors are open. And perhaps there's more engagement with our material online than there is in person. And as Jonathan mentioned, we don't know who the identity of everyone who's watching. I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of views, over 1 million, maybe we're approaching 2 million now on our YouTube channel, something in that ballpark. So we don't know who are watching every one of these videos, and I'd like to think that we're engaging with that community. And we have, we also, there's a wonderful scholar that we had, was it last year or the year before?
Chaya Nova,
Yeah, Chaya Nova on our Yiddish Civilization lecture series, who gave a talk in Yiddish about contemporary Hasidic culture. And this is she's a wonderful linguist and she studies this. And
she's a Satmar.
And
right?
She's a Satmar, exactly. Yeah. And so she is her own connection point between these communities, and I think it's wonderful, but it's sort of rare.
Yeah, we were approached by 2 journalists recently from Mishpacha magazine, which is an Orthodox magazine, and they were interested in using archival material as the basis for historical pieces. So that's something.
I would also say in our Yiddish language classrooms, our faculty, Yiddish scholars are increasingly more and more interested in the Hasidic world and Yiddish-speaking communities that are ultra-Orthodox, and the literature they're producing and the online material that they're producing. And so it's being incorporated more into learning materials, and it's definitely more of a topic of research and interest.
But it's just bits and pieces. We have 750,000 visits a year to our digitized content. And I know that there are individuals from the Hasidic community who are using these materials, especially the pre-war materials. I know from the reference questions that come in. But it's not systematic in any way. And I think that's the question. Can we systematically engage with the community?
You have to invite them to the Learning and Media Center.
No.
You have to abandon YIVO spelling if you want to.
Actually, I will say, if you look at some of the contemporary Hasidic publications, the spelling is very close.
No, Mordechai Schechter always claimed that the Hasidic world, the press, was coming closer to the YIVO press. It's not so.
I think that's true. You could ask David.
You can use Isaac Bleeman's Hasidify, which is an app that you can convert between orthographies, and there you go.
One thing you have to realize is that while YIVO has been around for 100 years, we are constantly in a process of rebuilding. And we do not yet, at this point, have a full complement of staff or infrastructure that would allow us to take on some of these big additional projects. And this is a serious issue that bears on our prospects of growth for the future and how we would grow and the kinds of staff that we need in the archive. But the first priority has been to clean up the backlog and to make all that was there as available as possible. to a world public.
You realize, of course, that backlog is a venerable YIVO tradition.
I understand that, but you were talking about research and scholarship. So in aiding research and scholarship, we have to clear up that backlog. As I understand it, and you can correct me, Stefanie, most of the Bund archive was never really processed, which meant that it couldn't be used. So it's sitting there for years and years and years and years, and nobody is using it. What's the point of it, you see? So we have to do that. That's our obligation. If somebody would come along and say, here are the resources you need to grow, to expand, to add 3 new positions, to increase our digitization from 8 people to 12 people, well, then it's a different ballgame for us. We could do a lot more.
Right, the wealthy Bundes type that you're looking for. No, it's not really a joke. There were always wealthy Bundists who were Mäzenaten, who helped YIVO in its mission.
I think we've found all of them.
But
maybe
you now have the
some in
neo-Bund.
Australia we don't know about.
Yeah, and just to add, I mean, Stefanie and her team have done such a phenomenal job, are digitizing hundreds of thousands of pages a year, close to 1 million a year, multiple hundreds of thousands of pages a year. So every year, the amount of material that is just available for free on the internet to anyone with an internet connection is growing. And it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And with even more resources, it'll grow even faster. So it's not about an if, it's a when, and that opens up even more opportunities.
However, there is one thing that we are going to be exploring very soon, which is AI technology.
Right, that was my question. How is AI going to help you?
Well, it can help in translation.
It's ruining my life, but how is it going to help you?
We are exploring possibilities of translation of handwritten material. So that would be a huge step for us and for the world if we could do that.
I'll just add. With that, though, I mean, I know that other institutions often or have used AI and have gotten rid of their human staff. And I think that the way we see, or we may see AI as working, is that it will actually increase our human staff, right? Because we understand that AI is extremely imperfect, and that, I mean, it's not in a state right now that can be used without a lot of intervention from extremely knowledgeable people.
Right. On that point, I'll just tell you a small story. When I started working on this book, I asked AI to write it for me. I went to ChatGPT and I asked a bunch of questions, and it told me that the head of YIVO in America was Noah Perlutsky, who was murdered in Vilna in 1940. And I realized that I still had some work left for me to do.
This sounds like a Borges novel.
Yeah, I mean, I think the AI we're dealing with today, you know, it's in a very primitive state in many cases. To what you're saying, Kalman, that it's getting better and better. So it's not as I agree with you, Stefanie, that I think the optimal path forward is always going to be a human technology partnership. That we're going to need human beings who have specialized knowledge, who've studied, who've done the training, to work with whatever the cutting edge technology is. And we've talked about numerous different digital humanities projects and different initiatives that could come out of this kind of collaboration. So, and especially in terms of, you know, the AI universe, it's hungry for data. And what we're feeding it in a judicious way is more and more data as we digitize more and more. More and more is becoming available. But we have, I think, a huge opportunity to guide that process in a humanistic and a scholarly and a proper way to make sure that it's not telling you that Noah Perlutsky is, you know, head of YIVO.
Right. I should tell you, if you're looking for a good book about Noah Perlutsky, I can recommend one. I know the author. That's right.
I heard AI wrote it.
So I have to say, this is somewhat of an indelicate but an important question. You know, this auditorium is not full. It's nice to see everybody here, but there are so many people whose histories intersect with YIVO who could have been here but who aren't here for whatever reason. They're at home watching, they are away, but there's also a history of people who are estranged from YIVO for various reasons. YIVO is an institution with scandals, like any other institution. And there's always a tension in YIVO's history between this desire to be super partisan or nonpartisan, and between serving contemporary needs. And I wanted to hear from you about how you felt YIVO is managing this tension nowadays. You've had a number of scandals in recent years, at least from where I sit in Canada. I mean, I don't know. They tell me, when I came here to America, they told me, why are you going to America? They're going to kill you there. Don't go. So everything could be distorted by the internet. But nonetheless, there is this tension, really, seriously, between your public mission of dealing with the past and dealing with contemporary issues in Jewish life. And I wanted to understand how YIVO understood that tension today.
Well, YIVO does not choose sides, but YIVO is committed to telling the truth. And sometimes people interpret telling the truth as choosing sides, when it's not, when it is simply the truth. And this is a problem, but I'm committed to telling the truth when that need arises. And that need arose a couple years ago, after October 7th. When there was a huge public misunderstanding, I felt, of what Hamas was. And I know this is probably not welcome to everyone here, but the truth about what Hamas was, where it originated, how it originated, what its intentions were, was simply not getting into the press. And so the programs that we put on were not partisan, in my view. They were, rather, exploring the origins and the ideology of this organization that had a meaningful connection to the Jewish world, not only today, but long ago, in the past, when the Mufti of Jerusalem met with Hitler and worked out a final solution for the Middle East. And these are things that, yes, have to do with public education, but we can see very clearly how public education on many significant issues has failed the American people, and how so many issues have been twisted by rhetoric, by partisanship, by misinformation. And so I don't know what else you may be referring to, but I assumed you were referring to this.
I didn't have, look, there are many things, but I let you answer. I mean, someone asked me about, people ask me, I live in Canada, so people are fascinated by you Americans, and they ask me what you Americans are doing, and I have to interpret you Americans to them, and they want to know about how young people view YIVO today, and they know there are factions, and we also know that YIVO there was a huge divide about the Soviet Union amongst people who were interested in YIVO in the 1940s.
Yes.
YIVO had a great interest in some of these topics that you were talking about just now in the 1940s and 50s, but that largely disappeared from YIVO's trajectory in subsequent decades.
Well, it has and it hasn't. We've had more than one program here on the Soviet Union, on espionage, on the Gulag. I had a program on children of the Gulag and children of the Holocaust. And Deborah Dwork and Kathy Frierson were here talking about similarities and differences and so forth. And I had that program precisely because of the misconception, I believe, on the part of many people of what has been dubbed the double genocide theory. And the purpose of the program was simply to try to explain what most people know absolutely nothing about, which was the fate of children in Stalin's regime. So we have had some such programs. It admittedly is less of an issue now, unless you want to deal with some, you know, oddballs in contemporary American politics. But it seems to me that the subject of Soviet propaganda is not an irrelevant issue today, because it was the Soviet Union that trained a whole generation of terrorists and taught them essentially how to identify themselves with the far left in Europe and in America.
I think that YIVO attracts real engagement from people, and it can have these scandals because our audience is a kind of mixed multitude. Because the way I see it, YIVO really kind of transcends many of the issues that divide the Jewish community most of the time. In terms of politics, in terms of religion, like, yes, we're a secular institution, but we only serve kosher food, and, you know, people that are religious come here too, and it's a shared past and culture that we're exploring. And so in terms of religion and politics, I think that most of what YIVO does really transcends it. And that's part of the joy of it, and that's part of why so many different kinds of people can find a home in YIVO. You know, people that, in many cases, are, you know, alienated from some aspect of the Jewish community that they want to be a part of. They can find a home at YIVO. There's a lot of different people that are alienated from different aspects of their communities that can find a home in YIVO. And I think that lends itself to when YIVO is a home for you, you really care what it does. And so when it does something that is different than you value, and this happens on all sorts of issues. This is not just this one series. Mm-hmm. I'd say, you know, at least a few times a year, there's like a brouhaha, a glazel, you know, Sturm and a glazelte about something, about a speaker that we had.
Jewish Christmas, I think.
That happened one year. We had a Jewish Christmas. We've done Jewish Christmas like 6-7 times, something like that.
Sorry, what is Jewish Christmas? I just read a book that's coming out about Jewish Christmas celebrations.
Okay, so, you know, as I'm sure many of you know, many of the popular Christmas songs were written by Jews, and as just a fun event, we decided to have a sing-along of Christmas songs written by Jews. And it was, honestly, it's
a good program.
It was fantastic. And we had a speaker who wrote a book about this phenomenon give a talk, so it was contextualized. And then we had a sing-along, and I've never seen people so happy in this place.
What did we eat? What did we eat after?
Sorry?
What did we eat after?
And then there was a Chinese food feast, obviously. Kosher.
Kosher Chinese food. But this was a scandal, or?
This wasn't a scandal. No, this wasn't a scandal. This was so much fun. I mean, you had people that were like, grab your mishpacha and sing along to White Christmas. I mean, people were just overjoyed in this very hall. So we thought we have to do this every year. And it became an annual tradition. And Itzik gave a talk on Christmas, folklore about Christmas in Yiddish. And it's so fascinating, and we kind of thought about it. And there's so many different topics of Jewish encounters with Christmas or with Christianity. Naomi Seidman, who was here earlier today, gave a talk about Yiddish translations of the New Testament. And it's just a really fun thing. One year, we had Azan Yadin give a talk about Toldos Yeshu, which I will say, Toldos Yeshu. I'll explain what it is in a second, but first I'll say we have numerous copies of Toldos Yeshu in our Vilna collections that were looted by the Nazis and saved by Sutzkever and Kaczorkinski and others in the Paper Brigade, and here in New York now, miraculously, and digitized as a part of our digitization project. So I mean, this is it's an amazing part of YIVO's own history and of the heritage that YIVO for 100 years now has been working to save. The story of Toldos Yeshu is it's a kind of inverted gospel. It's like it's like an anti-gospel, in which it's a satire in which Jesus is a mamzer, and he's actually an amazing rabbinic student, but he doesn't get along with people. Eventually he steals the name of God and uses it to perform magic, and Judas has to go after him and bring him to justice. So, it's a fascinating story that speaks, and it's a very old story too. It's a story that has been it's in many different versions in many different languages, in Yiddish, but also in Judeo-Arabic and it's not known who wrote it, and there are many different versions. So it's not quite from, antiquity, but it's a pretty old text, and it's just a fascinating story. We had an academic lecture about it, and we had readings from it, and that was our. It's not known what the original language is. It comes to us in many fragmented forms. If you're really curious to learn more about it, there's like a 1,000-page book that Princeton did. They did a big conference about this like 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, I have the children's coloring book version for my kids.
It's a fascinating story. The origins of this, what's in it, what are the kind of theological arguments of that? Why did Jews want to tell this story? And of course, it's a story of Jews living in Christian lands are kind of like poking fun at the majority culture, and part of the ritual, and Itzik had talked about this in his talk. Part of the ritual was to have readings of this on Christmas, so to have some fun and to kind of and that was the spirit in which we were doing, to have some fun, but also to explore this really interesting bit of history, again with like deep ties to YIVO and its collections. And I think many hundreds of people understood that, and one person was really upset.
I think. Oh.
No, I was going to talk about another scandal. If you,
I was just
Hear
going to
another
say,
scandal.
There's more to
a
YIVO than
general-
scandals.
A
believe
general
me.
comment about this is that I think we all want YIVO to be a space that's for open intellectual inquiry, and that we can have lively debates. If you're going to have an open space where there's scholarship being presented and different arguments presented, and people are going to have disagreements, and they're going to be challenged by the scholarship. And so I think we all want that space to be characteristic of YIVO, and so we hope that the discourse remains somewhat civil. It doesn't devolve into a to a food fight.
I just want to say, no one who came to the program was upset. Someone was upset who didn't come to the program.
By the way, well, first I want to say that Jordan Chad just is publishing a book about the history of Jewish Christmas traditions, which is very interesting, worth reading. But secondly, I mentioned earlier today that Isaac Nachman Steinberg left the YIVO conference over the issue of reparations and protests about blood money. And then he wrote a letter to YIVO later on and said, well, don't you want me back? I'm ready to come back.
Yeah, but there are many stories. The Nachman Blumenthal, there are a lot of, sort of refugees from YIVO who want to come back, but they didn't get asked back, so they refused to come back. It's like that's an ongoing thing here.
But now we have the Blumenthal archive, and we have the Steinberg archive too.
So they came back.
Yeah.
Posthumously came back.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you about the research side of things, because obviously research has evolved over time. And I wanted to know what you thought the kind of work, what kind of work research-wise is YIVO doing now, and what would you like to see it be doing in the future?
Well, the reality is that YIVO does not have a research team. It doesn't have departments like it used to. And the reality is that the way that Jewish studies developed in America, all of this research has sort of been farmed out to university Jewish studies departments or to history departments or literature departments. That's where all of this is taking place. As far as it affect us, or as far as we're involved, is we give out 8 fellowships annually to scholars, graduate students, professors who are working on a wide variety of different projects. And the purpose of these fellowships is to fund them in order to do work in YIVO's archives and library. So, you know, YIVO Blätter is no longer published. YIVO Annual is no longer published. So there's no, it's not happening internally, but we still fund scholars to do work in YIVO's archives, and that's how that research now takes place. And that's the reason that I thought that, you know, creating a center along the lines of Frankel or Schusterman would be a great addition to YIVO to sort of reintegrate that research component to the organization.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would just add that, you know, for public programs, we do many book talks which really focus on books that were researched at YIVO in large part, and you would not believe how many pitches we get, like dozens, hundreds of pitches a year, actually. And those range from, you know, this person researched their entire book sitting in our reading room to, you know, it was a peripheral source for part of their inquiry. But the fact is there's so much research that's happening thanks to the accessibility of our collections, and there's so much possibility with the research apparatus of the whole field out there that once our materials are as our materials are more and more processed and digitized and available, there's just a huge amount of scholarship happening. And so it does ask this question of, like, if YIVO is going to contribute to scholarship, what can we add that's not already happening outside? Because it's not like it was in 1925 where, you know, there was just such a dearth of people doing this, and YIVO created the field by investing in it. But this field is out there and it's really vibrant. So it becomes a question of how can we really, you know, add some rocket fuel to it. It doesn't need to be stoked to just exist in the first place.
Not everyone who comes to the summer program, for example, is necessarily in a PhD program, but we do have many PhD students who come to us because they need Yiddish, and perhaps their program doesn't offer as many opportunities, or any opportunities in many instances, to get the kind of rigorous training you would need, not just to have the language ability, but also to conduct the research. So being here at YIVO, being connected to the archive, we're supporting that research in that indirect way of training the scholars of the future, who really will be able to go into the archives and be able to find the material and be able to contextualize and translate it. So I think that's an important part of what we do as well.
I mean, this leads me to the question of what are the resources that you'd like YIVO to produce for scholarship? YIVO has a history of producing resources, whether it's textbooks or a guide to the archives and so on. And now I'm trying to remember my second question, which was equally brilliant, but yeah, but the larger question of what is the role of Yiddish in this historically Yiddishist organization in the future?
I mean, this summer program, we have the regular classes. Obviously, there are, I mean, even though I get to speak Yiddish every day at work, I think the vernacular of the organization is now English. You know, and like I said, YIVO no longer produces YIVO Blätter or YIVO Annual. And so the role of Yiddish here is, or the role of Yiddish for YIVO is as really a kind of pedagogical institute where we're teaching scholars how to learn this language for a wide variety, and it's not just scholars, but it's a wide variety of people to have, we're giving access to this language to a wide variety of people for a wide variety of purposes. It can be, you know, artists or playwrights or writers who want to get it, who are inspired by the culture and the language. It can be scholars who need to access archival and bibliographic materials. It can be really anything along those lines. Because it's no longer a vernacular, the role has really changed significantly. But I would still say that it is very much an integral part of the institution's identity and its purpose.
We're not going to lose that. There's no fear of losing that. But we have to respond to reality. We have to respond to the reality of the world we live in and the world that's beyond our borders as well. Otherwise, we're just living in, a chulum.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Eddie, that it's a huge part of our DNA. We also have to be realistic about what opportunities are out there and how we can best support the communities out there, as you're saying, Jonathan. But Yiddish, it's so many things. I mean, we do speak it in the office a good deal, even though we also conduct business in English. And it's a gateway. It's a bridge into this entire civilization. It gives you access to so many different things, not just our Yiddish language materials, but this entire culture. And I think any deep engagement with a language that you're acquiring or reacquiring is going to be a transformative experience for an individual. That it's going to change you in some very profound way, as I think anyone here can attest. Whether you've just started to study Yiddish, there's so many students here, again, in person, online, or you've been studying it for many years, it becomes a part of who you are and how you move through the world and how you perceive your experience. So, and it does, as you're saying, Eddie, it can be in the path of scholarship, or it can be in the path of translation or the arts, or there's so many artists who come to us to study, or people who work in museums, or who have or who want to be archivists or librarians, and it informs and it gives them the training to see the world in a different way and be able to respond more sensitively, more insightfully.
Right. If you look at the post-World War II history of Yiddish, probably even before it, you see that every 20 so years there's a mini Yiddish renaissance. The same articles written about Yiddish in the New York Times. And but the meaning people find in it is not exactly the same. There's a renaissance of finding new meaning in Yiddish. This seems to be a constant.
I think in a broader sense, I wonder about the way that, we heard today so much about how YIVO, from 1940 in the decades after, adapted to find new ways to study Jewish life that really led to the new Jewish reality of that time. And which really because of the Holocaust and because of migration, had to do more with America and had to do with more with not just the encounter of Yiddish folk culture with modernity in Eastern Europe, but then also how that then impacted American Jewish culture, and that becomes a story that YIVO becomes really invested in telling, making doing tons of collecting and doing exhibitions and doing projects. And I think that's the question that I have, going forward, or what are the ways that we, especially as we, deal with that backlog and we, get our materials processed and cataloged and digitized, and we deal with all these projects that we have to kind of get our house in order. Then the question of, what are the questions historically that will help us understand today even better? And so those different Yiddish revivals that we're experiencing, really being able to offer the material and the kind of intellectual apparatus to deeply understand them, and to deeply understand the Jewish world more broadly in which they're happening, which, again, like as we saw today, starts to include a lot of things aside from Yiddish. Yiddish is a very important part of it, but it's much broader than that.
Are there projects that are your dream projects for YIVO to realize in the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, there's a backlog of, unfinished projects in the archives. But between those and other things that you've thought of, where would YIVO like to be?
Where would we like to be, or what projects
in terms
do we
of
want?
what would you like to be?
Well, we want to finish the Bund. We want to start the Landsmannschaften project. We want to develop a master's degree program in Yiddish language and civilization. And we are working on it, and we hope we'll be able to announce something by September.
Later this year.
Yeah. That will be a big step for us, a very big step. We want to expand our digital production. I want to expand our additional educational outreach, not just through the Learning and Media Center, but through the online museum that we haven't talked about. I was recently in Lithuania. The Lithuanian government translated the entire first exhibition into Lithuanian, and I was in Vilnius just this past week for a 2-day seminar with 40 Lithuanian teachers to teach them how to use this in their classrooms. So it's a very powerful tool. I would like very much to have that publishing project that we talked about.
The bilingual annotated
Anita
editions.
Norwich is ready
Yes.
for the publishing project.
The publication of 100 objects is an example of what we can do. YIVO published that, designed it, Stefanie edited it, everybody worked on it. The vegetarian cookbook that we have, we published the second edition of it. There are many things. I would love, when I first got here in 2009, I actually got a contract from Yale University Press for a revision of the Uriel Weinreich College Yiddish, but it never happened for some reason. And I think it's too late for that. But there may be other materials associated with teaching Yiddish that need to be available and at the highest standard. You know, and I would love to have the resources so that if a scholar comes to us and says, this is what you have to do, we can respond to that.
There was a joke at YIVO years ago that everyone's dream job is Minister of Ideas, where you get to just sit around and just dream up dream projects. So I think there's a long list, as we've been saying, of dream projects, and it's really just about having the resources. I love the idea of the bilingual series and many different kinds of teaching materials we've talked about over the years. And as we're saying, digital humanities projects of, we started to do it of maps and different ways to interact and explore, you know, the history of Eastern Europe and Yiddish civilization and Jewish civilization around the world. So it's a very long list, Kalman, of different.
But right now, we don't have anywhere to really exhibit all of our stuff. There is stuff that we have that has never seen the light of day. We have 12,000 posters. How many posters do we have? More than that. How many have ever been exhibited? A dozen. And, you know, this is a shanda. It is. That these materials that were saved during the Holocaust have just been kept under lock and key. And so it's as if they don't exist for the majority of the Jewish world. What is the point? We are also working with the Vernadsky Library in Kiev to digitize all of the Ansky collection that they have. That includes a very important segment of the Ansky expedition of 1912-14, as well as additional materials of Ansky. And when we finish with that, we have an agreement to digitize their entire Judaica collection, partly to preserve it from Russian rockets.
You have a lot to do.
Yeah.
I see it's a little bit past 8, and we have until 8:30.
I think everyone wants to eat cookies now, so
Well, I
if
was
there's
going to
any
ask,
final
should we open up
remarks-
the floor to some questions from the audience now?
This hand went up.
Do I get to acknowledge people? Fantastic. Well, I saw your hand up first, and then we'll get to you second.
I, as a former scholar, as a former consultant to a think tank, as a former everything, I am sometimes semi-retired. That's my profession now. I'm a semi-retired person. Do you plan any joint ventures with other academic or cultural institutions so that there would be a symbiotic relationship between what you know you have available to show and what other institutions, so there could be traveling exhibitions co-sponsored by YIVO and the Museum of the Jewish Heritage, or the Jewish Museum on the Upper East Side, or the Lauder Museum, or museums in Eretz or other places that would love to see this joint combination. How does Yiddish fit into the present world? How can I access it for my personal life, whether I'm a Jew or not?
We have many such arrangements. We've had exhibitions at this Museum of the City of New York, the Jewish Museum in San Francisco. We have an arrangement with Carnegie Hall for
right, yeah.
concerts.
Smithsonian.
With the Smithsonian, with Vilnius University. We have just established a fellowship with Ben-Gurion University. But speaking of people wanting to see this Yiddishkeit, these materials that we have, when Bibi Netanyahu went to Vilnius to look at our materials, he was on camera, and he looked up at the camera and he said, "My God, I didn't know these exist. These are the treasures of the Jewish people of Eastern Europe." I immediately called my friend at the National Library of Israel. I said, "How about a joint exhibition?" He said, "Well, I don't think it'll fly here, but I'll check." And 2 days later, he called me up and he said, "No one's interested." So that happened a few years ago, but still it's a good indication of the kind of headwinds that YIVO faces and that Yiddish materials face in the larger world. On the other hand, we have a very active collaboration with Polin Museum in Warsaw. They have one of our Breitbart.
No.
Oh.
We have it back.
Oh, we have it back?
It's in the exhibit now.
Oh, okay,
They have
good.
2 Purim molds.
They have something else of ours.
No, but our exhibits that we've produced have gone to other Jewish museums, the Jewish Museum of Miami, Jewish Museum of Milwaukee, Jewish Museum of Maryland, the Yiddish Book Center.
And yet you keep boycotting Canada. You never come to Canada.
Kalman, you have to invite us.
Canada hasn't invited us.
That's not true. We did many YIVO talks in Canada the last few years.
So Carol, you had a question?
It's not actually a question. So I don't know if you accept it. It's a joke.
I'm sorry?
It's a joke.
Are jokes permitted in YIVO?
We have a whole book of them.
If they're in Yiddish.
Yes.
Yes, can I go ahead? Right. It's Christmas time at Macy's. Yep.
This is not Yiddish.
Wait. Just wait. And there's the Santa's grotto. Yep. And there's Santa with his big beard, and all the children are lining up. So along comes this little boy, and he sits on Santa's lap. That's okay. They're letting do that, you know. No, none of this sort of. Anyway. And he says to the boy, "So what's your name?" He said, "Oh, my name's Michael." He said, "Oh, Michael, you're the nice Protestant boy from around the corner. Take a toy." So he takes a toy, and then along comes a little girl, and she says, "My name's Molly." He said, "Oh, yes, you're the nice Catholic girl from 2 blocks away. Take a toy." And then this little boy gets up on Santa's knee, and he says to him, "What's your name?" He says, "Oh, my name's Itzek." She said, "Oh, you're the nice Jewish boy from around the corner. Nimm zwei." after you got your Yiddish.
That's the addendum to Toldos Yeshu.
Okay, we have a few questions over here.
Yes, we have some questions. I think that was the one joke
Yeah.
we'll permit for tonight, but we have some questions. Okay. Let me start just in order of proximity with our distinguished colleague from Beijing.
Thank you very much. I have a quick question. Facing the current anti-Semitism, global anti-Semitism, especially in America, and what has YIVO been doing, in fighting against anti-Semitism? I would like to know that. Thank you.
Well, we had these 4 programs, 3 of them on the origins and ideology of Hamas, and 1 of them on the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is probably the text that is still most evident in all of the rhetoric that you see, both abroad in Europe, in the Middle East, but also in the United States. Jews control the media, Jews are all-powerful, blah, 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 blah. Getting out and protesting is not something that we do. And we pick our moments. But the most important thing, I think, that we do is education about the Jewish past. And I see the Learning and Media Center as a key element in this process, which is a long, complicated, and possibly futile one. How long have we been educating people about the Holocaust, and what good has it done? But I say to myself, if we hadn't educated people about the Holocaust, maybe things would be even worse than they are. I don't know. I don't know what else we can do.
Well, I'll just add to that. Mark Smith talked earlier today about YIVO. Since its founding, being really an anti-lacrimose place, which is to say, it's a place that's much more interested in Jewish life and Jewish culture, in positive things about the Jewish world than in things like anti-Semitism, which is not to say we don't touch on it. And and he gave all these examples of this Holocaust literature, and Jonathan gave these examples of these programs about anti-Semitism. So we do touch on it sometimes, but I think that YIVO's kind of ethos is to fight anti-Semitism with Semitism, so to speak. Just by showing like just the wonderful richness of Jewish culture. That when you get to know it, it bucks all the stereotypes, that the anti-Semites are out there saying. But it's a bit of a more oblique response for the most part. But I think it's a wonderful thing that is important that we're doing.
And yet, YIVO is totally controlled by Jews.
More questions?
So we have
yes, Professor Norwich. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, you have the microphone already. I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Okay, go for it, Parker.
Well, being here this evening has given me a lot to think about. As a youth, my pressing question, because you keep talking about how you want to gain more youth into the program and you're trying to grow this relationship, but you keep talking about AI. So many young people do have a great fear of AI, and you've talked about taking jobs and this relationship with humanity. But I am very curious what your thoughts are on how it's destroying our environment, and it's got a lot of issues, and how you think it could be beneficial, even though a lot of youth have really negative feelings about it.
We look to AI to translate Yiddish handwriting. I don't know how it's destroying the environment, though I take your word for it. I assume everything we do, it destroys the environment somehow or other.
Well, I really love what you said, Stephanie, about how it will open up different technologies, not necessarily just AI, but different technologies as they develop will open up other new opportunities for jobs to engage with, to look at the archive and really be able to contextualize all of this material culture. But I think, we always want to be using technology in a responsible way. And, we try to be as efficient as possible. As, we're a Jewish nonprofit. We use the resources we have as efficiently as we can.
Excuse me one second. I have to tell you, it never occurred to me until just now during this conversation that if we developed some kind of an AI program that would translate as we would like, that it would take anybody's job. I can tell you that nobody's going to lose his job at YIVO because of AI.
No, what we said was we would add jobs if we were to use AI, because we can't use this technology without human intervention. And our goal here is and has always been to create full-time paid positions. We don't hire people for part-time gig work. That's just not our policy. And we've increased the staff over the years, over the past 10 years.
Yeah, when I got to YIVO, our staff was, I think, 22 people. It's now over 40.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I will say, we're not doing anything with AI right now. I mean, these are just preliminary conversations and ideas about how we can responsibly incorporate it into the work we do. So we hear you. I think...
Yeah, I think we agree with you, Parker. We want to, be responsible about it.
That was mean. There's a time-honored academic tradition when you're told that this is the question and answer period and you're supposed to ask a question, of making a long speech and ending it with, and what do you think about what I just said? So I'm going to try not to do that. I do have one very, very short question, which is not related to the long speech I'm not going to make, which is about the relationship between YIVO and other Yiddishist organizations that either exist or are coming into existence. Whether you see any, you have, without question, the unparalleled archive library, terrific staff, but what is the relationship with other organizations? But one of the things that's sort of struck me listening to all of these talks today is one of the ways in which YIVO's audience has necessarily changed. I don't want to, age myself, but I'll tell you very quickly. The first talk that I gave at YIVO, which was a while ago, I talked about, among other things, Yoshikal, and I said, a novel by I.J. Singer, and I said Yoshke was a diminutive of Jesus, and Singer was making some comment about Jesus, and 3 people yelled at me from the audience. You're misrepresenting, nobody cared about Jesus, nobody thought about Jesus. That is, the fear was, the other great, even better one, is I was talking about Mama Loshen, the mother tongue, and how Yiddish had been feminized, and some guy literally raised his hand and said, my uncle wrote Yiddish. So the point of this is that the fear... That wasn't a joke. The point of that is that the fear was that YIVO was misrepresenting the past, that these young upstarts were misrepresenting the past. Jesus, feminist, what's going on here? And it seems from this that the fear now is about the future. Is there going to be one? What will it look like? How will we form it? And I'm wondering what the focus on the here and now in the present is in your estimation. And I will tell one joke, which is, it's actually not funny.
The best kind of a joke.
But it's part of the controversy that we've been talking about. When Bibi Netanyahu said that the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem gave Hitler, Yamach Shemo, the idea for the final solution Angela Merkel said, the Chancellor of Germany said, no, that was us.
Well, that's absolutely true. I didn't say that.
No, I'm not talking about what you're saying. I'm talking about, no, obviously not. I'm just saying that the way in which it's easy to misrepresent the past it should give us some pause. And the question of what we're doing right now should give us even more pause. But so what do you think about
What are we doing now? I mean, that's a pretty big question.
Okay, so I'll go back to the easy one, which was the relationship with other Yiddishist organizations.
We have cordial relations with every Yiddishist organization that comes our way, and we try to be good neighbors with the National Yiddish Book Center and with other organizations.
We do collaborative programming, which, Anita, you've been involved in some of it. They have taken our exhibitions. They've written about and done podcasts about our projects. I mean, we're very good friends with the folks at the Book Center. You know, the simple explanation of the difference between us is that they're really about books, and we're the archives and books. And they've got the books that everyone had. We've got the books that were very, very rare. I'm sure that's obvious to many people here, but yeah, we complement each other, and I think that that's true also with the Workers' Circle. They are an activist organization. We are not. They're a kind of fraternal organization. We are not. But obviously there's overlap in our interests, and insofar as there's overlap, we're very happy to collaborate on programs and on other initiatives, like there's the catalog that just was released. If you want to say anything about it.
The Universal Yiddish Library catalog, yeah, which we contributed, tens of thousands of records to.
Also, Steph and I are both involved within GIVEB. GIVEB frequently uses our material. They have a regular From the Archives column. It's mostly, I would say, 99.9% our stuff. So that's another organization that we're closely connected to.
You want a robust ecosystem. You want Yiddish-focused organizations working together on the things that they can work together on. And many of the scholars we work with us. They work with many other organizations, and it's good because it means a larger audience, and it means the scholarship is getting to more eyes and ears.
Yes. Well, actually, before I get to Sam Norwich, I see you, but I also saw a hand, a young person in the middle of the room. Another young person in the back. So, okay, let me start with the first young person in the middle, and then we'll get to the young person in the back, if that's okay with you, Sam. Yeah. Yes. Great.
Very quick, simple question about the future of YIVO. 100 years from now, much of Manhattan below 59th Street will be underwater. What's the plan?
We're going to be above 59th Street. That's the plan. Only 60th and above.
What did you say, 50 years or 100 years? We'll let our children think about that.
You'll have completed digitization by then.
Back to Morningside Heights. Okay, that's what I'm saying.
YIVO satellite, we're going to be in space. Jews in space. That's, I think, the reality.
Well, I think in a also semi-serious way, one of the things we learn from studying this civilization and culture is that the future is not foretold. There are opportunities to produce new avenues, and that human ingenuity and creativity can do a lot of important things. So, in a general sense, are going to respond to go back to that technology question, we're going to respond to whatever the challenge of the day is, and the most responsible way possible to protect these materials, to share this culture with the world, and however we need to respond, we will, to ensure that it does have a safe future for the next 100 years.
All right, there's a hand in the back of the room. I can't comment on age anymore. I can't see that far.
Very few people are fortunate enough to live to 120, although Mark Smith's mother may accomplish it. And when I started at YIVO 10 years ago, we had a few people on staff who were native Yiddish speakers, like Shandel and Faggy and Marek Webb, who are no longer with us. And so the YIVO that was born in 1925, like most other beings born in 1925, in a sense no longer exists. So assuming that the rituals that I keep performing to summon a Dybbuk to inhabit me continue to not be successful, what is now the time for YIVO to create a mascot to embody the spirit of Eastern European Jewry that has been lost, and what do you think this mascot should be called and look like?
It really took a turn there.
I vote for Eddy Portnoy to be our mascot, actually.
I would just, more of a serious answer to the first part of the question. I think that it's a kind of like a ship of Theseus situation. You know, the myth, every plank of the ship is over time replaced, but the ship is fundamentally, in its essence, still the same ship. I think that YIVO is that kind of institution because you have, in every generation, you have these links. And I mean, this is a place with like tremendous, as you know, I know you know this, tremendous respect for the people that came before. And all those people had tremendous respect for the people that came before. And like the name of Max Weinreich is said every single day in these halls. Not to mention, you know, all of the other amazing figures from the history. So I think that we can still embody it, and it's going to always look different and keep changing. But I think we have a profound continuity at the same time.
So I think the last question of the evening or comment goes to Sam.
You asked earlier, Kalman, about YIVO's attitude to Jewish religious life and practice. Two vignettes. One from 1975, before my time, when YIVO was approached by the Church of Latter-day Saints with an offer to microfilm, that was the reigning technology at the time, to microfilm the entire YIVO archive at no expense to YIVO. Microfilming was then the only way to preserve these materials. YIVO didn't have the resources yet to microfilm them. And the Balabatim of YIVO, the board of YIVO, asked the Mormons the question, will you use the information in these microfilms to try to convert the souls of the departed? You have to remember that YIVO's board at the time was, I think, exclusively composed of secularist, anti-religious even men. When the Mormons said, well, of course, we are trying to save their souls, the YIVO board said, Loi mit an Aleph, no way, we're not doing it. It actually found funds from NEH to do some microfilming over the following years. The second the second vignette is from 10 years later, 1985. Arthur Cohen had just become chair of the YIVO board a few months earlier, and before leaving for the summer to his home in Mallorca, he gave me a check for $100, and he said, Sam, it's time for YIVO to put up a mezuzah. I told a few members of the staff that we would buy a mezuzah and put it up, and Chana Frischdorf, Aleh Shalom, who was the assistant director of YIVO and had been in the Warsaw Ghetto, said to me, Was sind wir plötzlich geworden eine religiöse Institution? Did we just become religious institution. I put the check in my desk. 2 months later, Arthur came back from Mallorca, and he said, Sam, you don't need my $100? What happened? The check had not been cashed. And I said, you know, Arthur, you're right. We will get a mezuzah. And I announced to the entire staff that we were about to get a mezuzah, and I asked Jack Weinstein, the frum Jew in the library, to get us a kosher klaf, kosher mezuzah. Before anything else happened, Bolek Ellenbogen, a fellow Bundist from Warsaw, came into my office and said, "Was, sind wir plötzlich geworden eine religiöse Institution?" And I said, "We're getting a mezuzah." The next day at 12 noon, I had announced to the entire staff, those who would like to be there, please be there at 12. And we put up a mezuzah. Just as we were gathered in the vestibule to put up the mezuzah, in walked two ladies from Great Neck. And one asked, "Is this the Jewish Museum?" And I said, "No, but we also have exhibitions, so please stay, join us. We're putting up a mezuzah." And one of the ladies asked, "Did you just move in?" And I had to explain that, no, we had moved in 30 years earlier, and that YIVO was the kind of institution that respected its forebears. And the forebears of YIVO had mostly been secular Jews, actually apikosim in one way or another, who had some of them gone through yeshivas, but had left that world and regarded themselves as weltliche Juden, secular Jews. But that, in fact, there was a deeper Jewish history going back far farther, and that we felt it was time for us to have a mezuzah on the door, so that any Jew who walked in would know that this is a Jewish house.
Yeah, you know, according to the YIVO Manias of that year, YIVO was going to sink into the earth. It wasn't going to be global warming. It was going to be the mezuzah.
I think though, Sam, you know, all those vignettes go back to this question of responsibility, that we owe an unpayable debt to the generations who came before us and to the people who risked their lives and who died to save this material and to carry this culture forward. And I think we all take that responsibility very seriously. A common refrain in the halls of YIVO is "Dos is a kasha," right? You know, that's a tough question, and that those questions don't go away. The questions of how to act responsibly with such a complex history, I think, is an ongoing question that just continues.
I think that's it.